Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my weekly astrological take on what's going on up there. Now, this week we've got a rather different aura around our astrology. We've left Uranus behind, and Uranus is a very kind of explosive influence. And we've moved into more dreamy territory. We've moved into Neptune land. And Neptune is the planet of mystery and mysticism and magic. And of course, we all need a little spritz of that in our lives, but we can't have too much of a good thing. And the underbelly of Neptune is when things get very distorted and illusory, and we can't see the wood for the trees. And I think with Neptune being particularly strong this week, and I'll explain why in a minute, it'll be easy to lose our way, easy to lose the plot. We just don't see things clearly. And I always remind myself, because like most of you, I lead a very busy life and I don't have time to really take time with certain things. And when I'm reading emails or things that have got a lot of text to them, I tend to skim. And the problem is you miss some essential facts there. So I've taught myself not to do that and to take my time with it. And then there are less potholes for me to fall into of a kind of Neptunian nature. Now, the reason I'm going to be talking about Neptune is that it is stationary. As I speak, it's stationary and was for a good part of week beginning the 18th of November. And if you remember, although I'll come back on that, that was a very weird kind of week. And it will continue to be extremely weird for a good part of this week as well, which is why I'm suggesting you take care with information and don't jump into things without due thoughts and perhaps a good reference point. But Neptune being stationary means it's getting ready to, in fact, in this case, turn direct. It's going to move direct on Wednesday. And when a planet is stationary, it's super powerful. Its properties are stronger, and we tend to notice that events to do with what that planet kind of governs, they come to the forefront of life, both in terms of our own small lives, our personal lives, and also on the bigger stage, on the world stage. So if I look at what's going on at the moment, and of course it was happening last week, Neptune being the principle of illusion, we've got a lot of political spin going on at the moment, certainly in Great Britain, where there's an election coming up. And really, can you trust any politician, what they're telling you? And over in America, of course, the big inquiry into impeachment. And we saw last week the US ambassador to the EU effectively throwing Mr. Trump and the rest of his, well, you don't call it a cabinet in America, but his team under the bus with him over the Ukraine business. So we still have a pattern of that. And of course, one of the biggest things we had happen was that Prince Andrew, who had come onto television on Saturday, the 16th of November, really to sort of explain his position on what was happening with Jeffrey Epstein and his part or non-participation in his affairs, that went very badly wrong. In fact, so wrong that by Thursday he was no longer a part of the royal team in the sense of doing royal duties. And of course, he'd been stripped of many of his charities, the headings of charities and organizations. So it was a real weak fall from grace. And I am going to be looking at at Andrew's chart shortly to show you a little bit more in detail about why that was such a significant occasion and why it is so Neptunian for him. I want to look a little bit about this idea of retrograde and direct. Neptune turned retrograde in late June of this year, and it has been moving backwards for the past 5 months. And I want to draw an analogy here, which I think is a very good one for you to understand. And that is, before a tidal wave, the seas pull back. And so they expose the land, but they're really pulling back, and they're pulling a whole lot of stuff with them, the seas, so that when the tidal wave comes crashing back onto the shore again, it's a deluge. And that's really the action of Neptune. As it's retrograde, it's picking up all sorts of stuff, it's scooping stuff up. And then sure enough, as it moves direct, change direction, stuff just comes out like a deluge. And that's what we've been watching. So let me talk a little bit about Prince Andrew and why, if we look at the astrology in a little bit of a deeper way, we can see quite dynamically what's going on in his charts. I'm just going to bring that up here for a minute. And I think you can see here, if I have my little arrow here, Andrew is a sun Pisces. He was born on the day the sun moved from Aquarius into Pisces, but he was definitely a Pisces. A royal birth is always an accurate birth, and it would have been, 5 minutes or so before that time to have the sun in Aquarius. And as it is, he's got a kind of an Aquarian feel to him because, of course, Uranus is rising in Leo. But as it is, we have Andrew as a sun Pisces with Mercury also in Pisces, and that's going to be very important in a minute. And of course, because he's a Pisces, he is ruled by Neptune. The sun ruler is the planet Neptune. And if we come down to where Neptune is in his chart, it's in the 4th house of home and family, the roots of life, the foundations of the future, I often say. And this Neptune is precisely squaring the ascendant-descendant axis. So it's a really pretty strong Neptune. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So at this point in time, several things are happening to Andrew. And perhaps the most significant thing I should talk about, although I have talked about his situation, both in terms of what's going on in his life and his past too, which I thought was important. I've talked about that on the homepage of Astrology, and you can read it there as well. But I'm going to look at it slightly differently here because I didn't talk about this all-important factor, Neptune in Pisces, because, Mercury in Pisces, because at this very moment in time, Neptune is conjuncting by transit this Mercury. And Mercury is the ruler of the 11th house on friendship. And that's very interesting because this whole incident has come about through Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, it's also the ruler, Mercury, of the 2nd house of the chart, which is to do with self-worth. It's to do with money and position to a certain extent. And of course, as you can see, this whole incident has really affected his standing, his financial position, a lot of things. And Neptune's conjunction to Mercury is really kind of telling the story here. But what else is going on that's very interesting is that Saturn returned to its original position for the 2nd time in his life earlier this year. It returned, from memory, maybe in about March, and it was there again in the August time. And for the 3rd time, it came back in October. And when we talk about a Saturn return the first time round, we talk about a coming of age, a coming of responsibility, of taking on responsibilities, of no longer being responsible or looking at other people for your direction, but taking on the mantle of adulthood yourself. And it's often at the first Saturn return that we take on an important job, we become parents, we get married, we pay taxes, we do all those good old Saturnian things. So the 2nd time around, when it comes around again, and that's any time from about the age of 57 through to about 59, and Andrew is 59, he's going to be 60 on his next birthday. So chickens come home to roost on a 2nd Saturn return. The things that you've been doing in the cycle of Saturn since it's been trundling around your chart for the 2nd time, you come to a point of assessment. And in a practical terms, and for most of us, the 2nd Saturn return is really a point where we need to have got our pension in order. We need to have been checking out our health and making sure that we're fit. And we need to have been doing all sorts of things that will put us in a good space for the onset of the 3rd chapter of life and the approach of the 3rd Saturn return. So to come back to this idea of chickens coming home to roost, you really do have to pay the piper on your second Saturn return. And this is played into the situation that Andrew now finds himself in. But also Pluto is in this area of the chart as well. And more significantly, right now, Pluto is squaring his midheaven and the Imam Kohli, the MCIC axis, the axis of home and family and heritage on the one hand, and on the other, your role in life, your direction in life. And Pluto, as the great transformational agent, is turning this upside down. It is in a great state of turmoil. Now, these influences haven't quite finished. Neptune at the moment is about 15 degrees of Pisces. It's not returned to the 17 degrees yet. It's been there a couple of times this year, but it won't reach that point until the very end of January and also in the early part of February. And of course, when we get to the mid-January period, that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is exactly squaring Andrew's MCIC axis, will be exact. And so I suspect that the January, late January, early February time is going to be a really, really difficult one for Andrew. And maybe it is at this time that he is really exposed in a sense to all the aspects of his relationship, what he did know, what he didn't know, and has to take even further account. So we can look at it that way. There is another point that I looked at in connection with Andrew, and that is coming back to this all-important Neptune again. And let's not forget that next year, probably more towards the June period, but that this Neptune will be opposed by Uranus. And remember, Uranus is an important planet for Andrew because he has it rising, and it is angling the ascendant and descendant axis here. So a lot is bound up in this, a lot of change, a lot of upset, a lot more things coming out of the woodwork that is still yet to come. But in my piece on the homepage, my Friday Bite, as I called it, I talked about the interesting fact that, and I'll come back, I will come back to full screen now, so leave that behind. I talk about the fact that Prince Charles has Neptune in the 4th house, and so does Andrew, and this is something they share with their great uncle, I think, and that's Edward VIII, who abdicated the throne in a very scandalous situation and married this American divorcee, Wallace Simpson. So at that period of time when that happened in 1936, the monarchy was very destabilized, and it could at that time have faded away. It could have been replaced by a republic. Such was the anti-monarchy feeling. And Edward had a part to play in that. He was both the sacrificial lamb, but also he almost made the royal family a sacrifice of the times. So we see this theme coming into both Charles and Andrew's life and experience. And though I say quite, strongly that I don't think either Andrew or Charles will be the reason for the demise of the monarchy, and I think the monarchy will recover from this, but they have a part to play in what I would call its diminution. And as we come into 2020, and there's going to be a lot of constitutional change because Parliament is going to have to change because of all the things that have stymied decision-making and held the country back. There has to be a lot of constitutional change. So it's very interesting that at this time we've got this huge a scandal really about Andrew that has threatened to really diminish the monarchy, and by sort of demoting Andrew, the monarchy will pull back to a certain extent and get its reputation back on tracks. But I just want to look at that kind of story that unfolds with the planets, and when we start to look at them in connection with what's going on in the times. But I don't really want to end on this Neptunian note. I really want to end on a Venus-Jupiter note. and that's for two reasons. On Tuesday, Venus moves into Capricorn. And of course, that's good news for Capricorns, because at some point over these next 4 weeks, there will be some sweet moments. Venus brings sweetness into life, technically harmony and love as well. But at least for one day in that period, every Capricorn is going to say, I feel blessed. How great is that? But I also see Venus as the herald of Jupiter. Venus, the lesser benefic, Jupiter, the greater benefic. So Venus coming into Capricorn first, 7 days before Jupiter, mighty Jupiter, enters Capricorn for a whole year. Now, I'm going to be talking in a lot more detail about what that means on my next video. But suffice to say, these two planets, which bring a lot of joy and increase and growth into our lives, they are still so very much present. Even though we are living in difficult times and it's hard to get a great piece of news out at this point, there are troubles everywhere. But I think what we need to do is focus on the positive. I know it's a bit of a kind of cliche to say that, and it's easy to say, a little bit more difficult to put into practice when we're really facing a lot of difficulties. But if we have just one thing that we see in our lives that is rich, that is giving us blessings, then by focusing on that and really building it up, really making that focus stronger, then it helps us to deal with perhaps all the things that are much more trying and difficult and really not working for us. So I'm going to leave you on that Venus-Jupiter note, and I will look forward to speaking to you, seeing you this time next week on my next video. Bye for now. Take care.